Hey everyone, me Kevin here. The stock market is bleeding and we need to talk about the FUD that's keeping the market pained right now. A lot of folks are wondering, Omicron, it's a nothing burger. Why are markets upset? Well, in this video, you're going to learn why markets are upset about this quote unquote nothing burger. And I'm going to show you where the uncertainty is and why is this so important? It's so important so that way when you track exactly the inflection point that I'm talking about in terms of this new set of data, you'll be able to know, okay, is this potentially the sign that the market's going to get ready to turn around? That's the time to know you're at bottom and go shopping, right? This makes sense. It also gives us comfort for the investments that we've already made in knowing that, okay, is there an endpoint of the pain? Now, this doesn't mean that more bad pain can't come, but this is definitely a big negative catalyst. So let's talk about this. We'll talk more about this, of course, in the course member live streams, which if you're not a course member yet, check out the programs down below. Use that Christmas coupon code before the end of Christmas Day. Okay, let's talk about this FUD that's keeping the market pained right now. First, we know that in South Africa, cases of Omicron are dropping and deaths are flat and low. At this point, honestly, this is the most generic response any loser is gonna give on Twitter, and it's really quite exhausting because it's basic. It's literally like people looking at a chart going, oh, look, okay, COVID cases going down in South Africa, deaths are flat, Omicron's a nothing burger, not sure why the market's falling off a cliff, oh well, fine. If you want that kind of like generic thought process, then fine. Just look at one chart, retweet somebody's dumb message, and move on. But there's so much more underneath this, and it takes hours and hours, days of research to understand. Whew, there's a lot we don't know, and this is where some of the uncertainty comes from. I don't profess to know everything, but I do profess to research this stuff all day, in and out, and that's why I think you watch these videos. So, there are three things that this chart does not tell us, and these three things are all very important when it comes to understanding what the heck is happening with Omicron in South Africa. Number one, localization. We are not out of the woods yet. Let's understand this. In Gauteng, the largest province in South Africa I believe we've got over 12.27 million folks in this particular province. We are seeing cases decline, hospitalizations start inflecting down. We have researchers from Gauteng saying, quote, for the first time, there are more non-severe than severe patients in the hospital. Great. This is excellent news. So why are markets still freaking out? Well, just because things are going great in the largest province does not mean things are going great everywhere. In KwaZulu-Natal, hospitalizations are actually rising, and we have substantially fewer vaccinations in this particular province than in Gauteng. This is a problem. And this is also what's contributing to the issue over here is the fact that according to doctors in this particular province, most of the patients who are coming to the hospital are unvaccinated. We've got hospitalizations climbing to 971 on December 15th, up from 79 on December 1st. 22 of those are in the ICU, and over 80% of them are actually coming to the hospital because of COVID, not because of other reasons. And that's really important as well. It's easy to throw around, it's mostly other reasons, or they're catching it in the hospital. That's fine. But when you start zooming in to the individual provinces, wait a minute, we've got different stories happening in different places. And this means we have to pay attention a little bit more closely to the individual areas, because that's going to help us understand what's potentially to come to the United States and how long we might be dealing with this drama. So that way you're properly prepared. In case you're sitting on short-term options, you're aware that, we need to be looking for particular inflection points. Now, of those who are in the ICU in this particular province, 41% need ventilation, which is a little bit higher than the average. We're seeing most patients who are being admitted to the hospital with Omicron are not in need of ventilation or certainly intensive care. But those who are in intensive care, we're seeing over 80% of them are unvaccinated individuals. Now, this is very important that we're seeing these different local spreads in South Africa. We want to really keep an eye on these different provinces, not just the biggest one, to understand South Africa. When you pull up the overall chart, it doesn't do you much good unless you actually have a breakdown of what's happening at the individual areas. And there's another reason for this. We're going to talk about this, okay? Here's the thing. First of all, We don't have great statistics on what I'm about to say in the United States, but this is pretty critical. Of the individuals in South Africa who are getting COVID, the vast majority of them either have been vaccinated, which is a very low percentage, less than 30% are vaccinated, or they have had a prior exposure to COVID. This could actually be leading to a rise of less severe cases in South Africa than we might expect to see in other countries, specifically the United States. See, research indicates that in South Africa, we have the majority of folks, quote, the majority of folks, according to the New York Times from 2 days ago, the majority of residents have already been infected with COVID. Only 1/4 of them are fully vaccinated. We generally get under 30% or between 1/4 and 30%. And that the vast majority of individuals in South Africa have had, quote, some level of protection in South Africa, and that there is much more herd immunity in South Africa. And in fact, statistically, it looks like 70% of the population has had antibodies before we even count the vaccinated individuals. That means once you factor in vaccinated individuals plus people who have had COVID before, almost your entire population has some form of protection to COVID. A lot of herd immunity here. This could potentially be making COVID seem less harmful in South African statistics. That's because if you've had prior exposure to COVID, you might still get COVID again. In fact, right now we know that your odds of getting COVID again, or your protection against getting Omicron, is only about 19% if you've had a prior infection, a prior illness. So in other words, prior illness only protects you about 19%, which is pretty bad. That's less protection than with a 2-dose vaccine. Obviously substantially less than if you had a recent booster. Recent boosters, like what we saw this morning with the Moderna news, recent boosters are really helping pump up your antibodies. But again, even the Moderna news only told us that antibodies are really strong and powerful for the first 29 days. They haven't yet done research on, great, how long is that immunity going to last? 3 months? Is it going to carry us through this winter season? Who knows? Maybe not. And so that's another problem that we have with Moderna. Even though Moderna was doing well in the stock market today, the rest of the stock market was not doing well. So anyway, so you've got this substantial level of herd immunity in South Africa, which is really interesting. And it's important to consider because something that prevents severe disease is some form of an immunity, whether it's prior illness or vaccine. That's because your T cells, even though the antibodies aren't doing so well, T cells are working very, very well against Omicron, and T cells are one of the ways that we can help prevent severe disease. Now, in addition to that, we've got me as your stock doc, of course. In addition to that, and this is the third big issue that we've got to look at. Okay, so number one is localization in South Africa. Number two, folks, number two is the issue that we have of herd immunity in South Africa. Many more people have some form of T cell protection in South Africa than we do in other places. The third big issue that we have in South Africa is the fact that in South Africa, the population is actually substantially younger than the population in the United States. The median age in South Africa, is 27.6 years old. The median age in the United States is 38.1 years old. This means our bell curve is substantially older in the United States compared to South Africa, especially since we're talking median here, not average. Now, it's too early to know with certainty, but so far we know Omicron has been relatively mild. We know there is a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt. We know that it's too early to determine, are we going to see hospitalizations rise and are we going to see deaths rise in the United States? We do expect to see hospitalizations and deaths rise from Delta, but that could coincide at the same time as we see Omicron infections rise. But when we blend these three issues together, what is the stock market left with, and what does the stock market hate? Again, me as your stock doc, you should know by now. What does the stock market hate? You should already be saying it. Unfrickin' certainty. So when people leave comments or tweets all the time, oh, this is all just FUD, it's just FUD. Bingo. It is FUD because it's fear and uncertainty, and there's a doubt. We don't have the answer of how Omicron is going to play out in the United States. And this is why comparing to South Africa is overly simplistic. We have to look at localization data in South Africa. We have to consider the substantial amount of actual herd immunity, mostly from prior infection or exposure you have, meaning most of the infections that we're seeing in South Africa are secondary infections. They're not primary infections. Big difference compared to the United States. And number three, you've got a much younger population in South Africa. And folks, this is really critical to understand as well. Over 62% of Americans have a full dose of the vaccine in America, meaning they should have that T-cell response. That's over about 210 million Americans. But unfortunately, that still leaves somewhere around 130 million Americans who do not have the vaccine. Well, let's say you take that 125 million Americans and assume that only people who never got the vaccine have gotten COVID, which is not going to be true, but this is to be conservative. That means we take 125 million Americans who have not had the vaccine, subtract 50 million cases that we've had in America. That means 75 million Americans could potentially be without a vaccine-induced T helper cell response or prior illness T helper cell response. That's 75 million Americans, matches what NPR believes would be 66 to 70 million Americans that potentially have no protection against COVID. That compares to almost an entire South African population with some form of protection against COVID. So wait a minute. Oh my gosh, when you look at it that way, 66 divided by 340, that means 20% of Americans, 1 in 5 Americans, could have no protection against COVID. Whereas in South Africa, maybe 1 out of 20 did not have some form of protection against COVID. So when we look at those South African statistics, you gotta take them with a grain of salt. So why is the market freaking out? Why is the market uncertain? Because we've got two totally different data sets here, and it is way too simplistic to just go, well, things are fine in South Africa, so they'll be fine here as well. I'm not trying to play FUD. I'm just simply trying to say, as your stock market doctor, in case you're wondering why the market's selling off, where that leftover uncertainty is for something that's deemed to be a nothing burger, which, in fairness, I have called it myself because I think the illness is relatively mild. I'm simply providing a reason why the market is continuing to hold on to some fear. I don't agree with it. Look, I'm investing. I'm buying. Don't get me wrong. Like, I'm investing. I'm not shorting the market anymore either. I'm investing in this market. So I think these are bargains. But let's be real. The market does not always align with exactly what we believe. Sometimes the market stays fearful a lot longer. Anyway, if you found this helpful, consider checking out the programs on building your wealth down below. Thank you so much for watching, and folks, we'll see you in the next one. Thanks so much. Goodbye.